2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. In these first, let's see, 5 verses, there's a ton of stuff. And we talked about last time the last days. Paul writes, but mark this, which another phrasing of that would be, hey, make sure you get this. There will be terrible times in the last days. It's not that there could be, or it seems like there probably will be. No, it is. There will be terrible times in the last days. We live in a world, and I'm assuming that we're sharing the same world in this sense, that our world, in generally in America, insulates us from most of, or maybe many of, the kinds of difficulties and even horrors that a significant part of the rest of the world live in day by day by day. Yes, there are poor people here. Yes, there are oppressed people here. Yes, there are problems that we have to deal with in America. But our poor people, generally speaking, in terms of the rest of the world, don't seem poor. You can do your own research on this, but you will find that the poor in America are above poverty in the rest of especially what we've called the third world. Okay. We're basically isolated from war. It's out there somewhere. Although, depending on if you're living in a big city, especially in the East or the West, you're probably there's a kind of war. Well, anyway, I'm not going to get into that. But what I do say is, for us, terrible times will probably not be quite as terrible as they would have been in century 1. We have more things available to us for rebound and recovery from terrible things than really any generation before us. So when we think about terrible times, and I know this sounds accusatory, and it probably is, but I'm accusing me too. When we think about terrible times, we're basically thinking about inconvenience. And that's not the same thing. Okay, mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. So when they come, here's the point, don't be surprised. We get taken by surprise all the time by things that we should have probably worked out that will probably be the outcome. Okay. And then he goes on to describe some of the things that will be involved in these terrible times. Verse 2, people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy. Okay, all of those things are on a character level. This is not a description of things that will happen. This is a description of how people will be. And I believe the result of how people will be these terrible times. First of all, people will be lovers of themselves. There's a pretty strong movement that I semi-support in the religious world today that would be a self-love movement. In other words, love yourself. Okay, that merits examination, and because it is or can be a biblical principle. Jesus said the greatest command of all was love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And then he said, and the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. There are reasons to hold the opinion that you can only really love your neighbor to whatever degree you love yourself. That your love for your neighbor is an overflow. Now, here's the difficulty, and we'll always have to struggle with this difficulty. If we have a love of ourselves without regard for love of our neighbor, we wind up with chaos. We wind up with terrible times. I very often am counseling Christians who have almost no love for themselves. They don't like themselves. And it's not that they don't like. It is true that they don't like things that they do, but that's not the core. Some of them hate themselves. Well, one of my questions is, do you love you? Most of them answer, no. How could I? Well, to love yourself has to be framed up with something beyond yourself. And that something for us is the grace of God. There's a sense in which I participate in God's grace as I affirm it, accept it, embrace it, appropriate it, however many other words you want to use, by permitting myself to love myself the way God loves me. This is not easy. And it doesn't happen in a snap or the flip of a switch. It's a dial turn. I learn how to love myself appropriately as God loves me. That's not the kind of love that Paul's talking about. This is a love of self that only has itself as its context. This is selfishness. This is egocentricity. It's all about me. And that's one of the themes that I see for all of my adult life in the world I live in. For many people, and maybe even most, and I'm even putting sincere Christians into this, at the bottom line, our life can often be organized around the idea that it's about me getting what I want. That is the kind of lovers of themselves that Paul's talking about. And to be smitten with myself. Lovers are smitten with their loved one. Well, the problem here is that they are their own loved one. Well, then they're lovers of money. Doesn't that make sense? If I'm going to love myself like that, if I'm a lover of myself, I'm smitten by myself, then I'm going to want to have all kinds of stuff. And one of the ways to get all the stuff I want and deserve as my own loved one is I got to have money. So I began to love money because of what it will do for me. The love of money, well, there's another word for that. It's called greed. The love of money, man, it's not a black and white thing. Either you love money or you don't love money. I think that the issue of love of money has to do with why do I love money? If I love money because I can get what I want, I can make myself more happy, and it's because after all, it is all about me. Okay, that is the doorway to all kinds of evil. Remember what Paul said? The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Now, there are people who make buckets and truckloads of money without loving money. There really are. They're not in the majority, I'll admit it, but there are people, I know some of these people, who they make money and the delight for them is not in accumulating money, but having money at their disposal to make available to other people. And several of the people that I know who have money, one of their highest joys is sending money on to people who are in ministry, on mission for God. What do I want to do with my money? That kind of, in my mind, that's the dividing line between loving money or using money for the purpose of advancing God's kingdom, His rule, His reign in the world. There's the old, it's a saying, and it's, how old is it? It's older than me, where it says, love people, use money. But if you love money and use people, things get way upside down, way fast. And Paul is saying, in these last days, people will be lovers of themselves and lovers of money. So they love money and they use people. They're boastful. The idea of boastful, he couples it with proud, and not just proud, abusive. See, boastful people are prideful people. Often, boastful people are making their boasts as an appeal for approval and acceptance and affirmation. It requires maturity to let people know that you desire approval, acceptance, affirmation. That it takes, I really do believe it takes strong maturity to be able to know how to ask for those things. The boastful, they don't ask for those things. What they're doing is trying to provide it for themselves with a boast. Why do people boast? Because they need this positive affirmation that they're valid, they're valuable. Just look at all they've done or what they've done. So there's that. Again, that really isn't that the taproot to that is in lovers of themselves. If I'm boastful, well, he goes on, proud. Pride is the taproot of virtually every human evil. They're boastful. They're proud. Arrogance comes to mind for me, but Paul follows that with abusive. We're going to come back to that because obviously there's a whole lot more in these 3 or 4 verses, but man, well, there's not time to go any more deeply into it today, so I'll come back to it next time. I'll see you then on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.